At 73, Margaret stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by 4 decades worth of belongings, with just 48 hours before the movers were due. Her children lived thousands of miles away, and she faced the task alone. But what unfolded next took every, including Margaret herself, by surprise. She didn't just clear out her 3-bedroom house in 2 days. She found a deep sense of release she hadn't experienced in years. So what made it possible? 7 surprisingly firm yet effective strategies that flip traditional decluttering advice on its head. The best part? These methods are perfectly suited for older adults, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed, low on energy, or unsure how to begin. I'll walk you through Margaret's exact step-by-step system, because it completely redefines how seniors can downsize in a meaningful and manageable way. Now, Margaret was far from naturally tidy. After her husband passed away, their home quietly turned into a gallery of memories she couldn't bring herself to sort through. Maybe that sounds familiar. But what makes her approach remarkable is that she didn't waste time agonizing over every object. She applied 7 smart, strategic steps designed specifically for people with decades of belongings and strong emotional ties. By the end, you'll have a clear, no-nonsense path that actually works without the sugar-coated fluff that often gets in the way. Here's the part that really stood out. Have you ever felt frozen at the thought of decluttering your whole house? If so, share your biggest obstacle in the comments. I read and respond to each one. Margaret's first strategy? Something called the triage method, borrowed from hospital emergency rooms. Just like ER doctors don't treat all patients the same way, you can't treat every item in your home equally. This was the key that unlocked her 2 years of being stuck. The system is simple but powerful. Margaret sorted items into 3 firm categories, spending only 15 minutes per room. Category 1. Absolute must-haves. These included medications, legal documents, everyday essentials, and personal comfort items. Think her morning teacup, her ID folder, and her reading glasses. Category 2. Maybe I'll use this later. This is where most people spiral into indecision. And Category 3. Anything she hadn't used or touched in over a year, automatically out, no questions asked. Here's the tough love most folks won't tell you. Category 2 got the same treatment as Category 3. Margaret realized that the maybe one day pile was really fear in disguise. And fear was exactly what had trapped her in clutter for so long. She accepted that making a few wrong calls was better than living in endless hesitation. She began with her kitchen, where it's usually clear what's necessary and what's not. In just 15 minutes, she uncovered 23 coffee mugs even though she only drank tea, 3 full china sets that hadn't been touched since her daughter's 1987 wedding, and a kitchen drawer full of unused gadgets. Her response? Decisive and unsentimental. 2 mugs stayed, the china was donated, and most of the gadgets were cleared out. She kept just her 2 favorite mugs, donated the unused china sets, and tossed nearly all of the kitchen gadgets, including the bread maker she had only used twice in a decade. The real shift happened when Margaret realized something profound. Keeping everything just in case hadn't brought her peace. It had quietly created stress. Each drawer she opened was a reminder of indecision, each overstuffed closet a source of anxiety. But every time she finished triaging a room, her confidence grew. By the 3rd space, she was no longer hesitant. She was excited to see what else she could let go of. When she got to the living room, the numbers were shocking. 47 decorative pillows, even though she only had enough seating for 6. A dozen throw blankets for someone who kept her thermostat at 75 degrees. And candles, dozens of them, even though she never lit a single one due to fire safety concerns. It was excess, plain and simple. What's the one just-in-case category that's quietly taken over your home? Maybe it's kitchen tools, out-of-style clothes, or shelves of books you'll never read again. Identifying that weak spot is often the first major step in finally breaking free from the clutter that clouds your peace of mind. Margaret's second trick tackled the hidden fatigue that often causes older adults to quit before they've even made progress. She realized something crucial that no one talks about. When you're older, you only have about 10 solid minutes of emotional decision-making energy at a time. After that, your brain shuts down, and everything starts to feel impossible. That's when people start keeping things not because they need them, but because choosing becomes too exhausting. So she created a simple rule. 1 timer, 10 minutes. 1 very specific area, not an entire room. A single shelf, a drawer, 1 cabinet. And the moment the timer beeped, she stopped even if she wasn't finished. That rule alone prevented the overwhelming burnout that had kept her stuck for 2 years. The magic of this system is that in 10 minutes, you don't have time to overthink. You start relying on your gut, and your gut often knows exactly what matters and what doesn't. Time pressure flipped from being a stressor to being a powerful motivator. Her first 10-minute challenge was her bedroom dresser. In just 1 drawer, She uncovered expired meds from the 90s, pens that didn't work, Christmas cards from names she barely recognized, manuals for appliances she'd tossed years ago, and a pile of random buttons. All of it gone. One drawer, one trash bag, one small victory. And here's what made this method sustainable: she always stopped while she still felt good. That way, she looked forward to the next session instead of dreading it. The sessions were short, focused, and effective. What surprised her most was just how fast those small chunks added up. By the end of that first day, Margaret had completed the 24th of September arrate 10-minute sessions. That's a total of 4 full hours of deliberate, focused decluttering without ever feeling drained or defeated. Instead of exhaustion, she felt energized. The psychological trick here is so effective because 10 minutes feels manageable to anyone, regardless of mobility or energy level. You're not signing up for an all-day battle, just a short sprint that your body and mind can actually handle. Between sessions, Margaret would take breaks. A warm cup of tea, a few minutes of her favorite morning show, or simply sitting in quiet. These resets gave her clarity and helped prevent the kind of decision fatigue that makes so many people give up and keep everything just to avoid the emotional toll. Do you tend to take on an entire room at once, only to end up overwhelmed and abandoning the effort halfway through? You're not alone. Margaret had done the same for years, and it led her nowhere but frustration. Her third trick was blunt but brilliant. She imagined a complete stranger sorting through her belongings after she was gone. And then she asked herself one question about each item. Would a stranger understand why I kept this, or would they think I was a hoarder? It wasn't morbid, it was freeing, because that shift allowed her to remove the emotional charge tied to each item. When you stop viewing your things through the lens of guilt, nostalgia, or obligation, everything becomes clearer. That stack of magazines from 2003? A stranger would toss them in the recycling bin. The collection of unused candles gathering dust because she was too nervous to light them? Gone, finally serving someone who would actually use them. Margaret took this stranger test and applied it to the hardest category for most seniors: sentimental keepsakes. She had kept every drawing, painting, and holiday craft her children made in elementary school. It filled boxes. But would a stranger keep 200 crayon doodles and finger paintings? Of course not. So Margaret kept the 10 most meaningful pieces that truly reflected her kids' personalities and let go of the rest, guilt-free. The biggest challenge came with her photo albums. She had 23 of them, filled with blurry shots, duplicates, and faces she no longer recognized. Using the stranger test, she realized most of the photos held no emotional weight anymore. So she selected and curated just 3 album songs that told her story with real feeling and let the rest go. And that's the power of this approach. When you stop keeping things out of obligation, you start holding on to only what genuinely serves your life now. It's not about letting go of memories, it's about honoring what still matters. The stranger test turned out to be surprisingly effective when Margaret tackled her wardrobe. She had outfits from her teaching days dresses and formal suits she hadn't worn in over 15 years. They no longer fit her body or her lifestyle. Would a stranger hold on to professional clothing for someone who had been happily retired for over a decade? Of course not. So she donated them to a local program helping young professionals build their first work wardrobes. But the biggest revelation came from her bookshelf. Margaret had over 300 books, romance novels, old diet guides, computer manuals from the early 2000s, and self-help books she'd already outgrown. Most of them had been read once Seifert Allen were now just collecting dust. The stranger test was brutally honest. Keeping books you'll never reread is simply another form of hoarding, one with a literary disguise. That realization made it easy to let go. Even the kitchen wasn't immune. She found herself staring at 12 spatulas, 8 can openers, and enough plastic containers to serve leftovers for a crowd she never hosted. Would a stranger understand that? Not a chance. So she trimmed down her kitchen tools to the essentials, just what she used and loved. Now pause and ask yourself, what's the one category of things in your home that would make no sense to a stranger? Be honest. We all have that stash of someday items that feel too guilty to toss, even though they serve no real purpose. Vivian's next strategy tackled the heart of that guilt. Her fourth trick was called the replacement reality check, and it completely changed her mindset. She faced the common fear head-on. What if I need this later and can't replace it? Instead of caving to that anxiety, she asked herself 3 ruthless questions. If I needed this exact item tomorrow, could I realistically get another one? What would it cost to replace it in today's market? In the past 5 years, how many times have I actually used this for anything meaningful? The truth was undeniable. Most things she kept just in case had cost her more in space, stress, and cleaning than it would have to replace them once in a rare while. like her 12 screwdrivers scattered across drawers. She hadn't touched more than one in years. Replacing them? Less than $15. The value of her sanity and clear space? Priceless. She kept the best one and donated the rest. She used the same lens for her craft supplies. Boxes of yarn she hadn't touched, fabric scraps from old sewing projects, even dried up paints that hadn't seen daylight in a decade. If she ever did want to paint or knit again, wouldn't fresh supplies bring more joy than stale ones from the past? That was the liberating realization. Keeping old tools didn't preserve opportunity, it blocked it. If she suddenly felt inspired to try watercolor painting again, Vivian knew fresh supplies would produce far better results than dried-up paints from decades past. Those old materials weren't preserving opportunities, they were simply taking up valuable space. But the real breakthrough came when she turned this same logic on the furniture stashed in her basement and garage. She'd held on to a set of dining chairs, just in case she ever hosted a big dinner. The reality? She hadn't entertained more than 4 guests at once in over 8 years. And if the occasion ever came up, renting extra chairs would be far cheaper than sacrificing her storage space for years on end. These chairs weren't serving her future, they were anchoring her to an unlikely past scenario. The kitchen offered some of the most eye-opening realizations. That bread maker she'd used exactly twice in 10 years? She could replace it at a thrift store for $20 if she ever truly caught the baking bug. The juicer collecting dust since her brief 2015 wellness phase? $30 at Walmart would get her a new one, no problem. Meanwhile, these bulky appliances were robbing her of clear countertops and making the kitchen feel cluttered and stressful every single day. Even her tool collection got a tough reality check. Specialty tools for home repairs she no longer did herself were donated to younger neighbors who could put them to use. She kept only the basics and accepted that at her stage of life, hiring professionals made more sense than hoarding equipment she hadn't touched in years. Here's the part that hits hard. Most of the items you keep, just in case, will never be used again. And the rare few you may need down the road? They're almost always inexpensive and easy to replace in today's world. Think about it, what item are you holding onto that could be replaced for less than $20? Leave a comment and let's walk through a few honest reality checks together. Vivian's 5th strategy saved her emotional bandwidth and helped her avoid the mental fatigue that usually derails decluttering efforts. She stopped treating every item as equally important. Instead, she began assigning her energy based on what actually mattered. She created an emotional energy scale, from 1 to 10, a simple but game-changing tool. Level 1 items got no emotional investment at all. They went straight into the trash or donation pile without hesitation or guilt. Level 10 items, the ones that truly mattered, were handled with care, given proper storage, and proudly displayed in her new space. Everything else fell somewhere in between, and she made quick, decisive choices based on how much energy each thing truly deserved. Books were a perfect example of this method in action. The romance novels she'd breezed through years ago rated a firm 1, easy to let go. Her late husband's technical manuals? A 3. She spent half a minute deciding whether her children might want them, boxed them up, and moved on. This way, her energy stayed focused on items that added value and meaning to her life, now not the ones that simply filled shelves. Her grandmother's handwritten cookbook, filled with cherished family recipes, earned a near-perfect score on Vivian's emotional energy scale. It rated a 9, deserving of careful cleaning, protective archival storage, and a prominent place in her new kitchen. This approach kept her from the emotional burnout that derails so many decluttering journeys. Rather than pouring equal effort into every item, Vivian focused only on what truly mattered. She could quickly spot which items were worth her time and which didn't even deserve a second glance. This clarity became even more powerful when she tackled her overflowing bedroom closet. With 67 garments crammed into a space meant for half that number and only 12 that she wore regularly, she put her energy scale into action. Most of her clothing landed between 1 and 3 on the scale. Easy donations without drama or guilt. The handful of pieces that she loved and felt confident in rated 8 to 10. Those stayed, got good hangers, and were arranged with care. In just 45 minutes, her once dreaded closet task was complete. But what she uncovered went beyond clutter. Vivian realized that the objects she'd been obsessing over, those sentimental decorations collecting dust, weren't actually making her life better. Meanwhile, the daily use clutter like kitchen gear and storage overflow had been quietly disrupting her peace and routines. That shift in awareness gave her new focus, everyday function over outdated sentiment. Her garage became a proving ground for this mindset. It was packed with relics of former hobbies, gardening tools, camping supplies, and sports equipment, all of which rated no more than a 2. With no energy wasted, she let them go. Arthritis had ended her gardening days, and she hadn't camped in years. Releasing 80% of that space was like reclaiming mental clarity. The garage stopped being a graveyard of what-ifs and became usable again. The emotional impact was immediate. With her energy no longer tied up in useless items, Vivian had the capacity to reconnect with what actually enriched her life. She spent more time on the phone with old friends, tried new recipes, and even started considering companionship again after years alone. Even paperwork wasn't spared. Outdated tax documents? Shredded without hesitation. Insurance papers and essential records? Carefully sorted and safely filed. Instead of drowning in "maybe I'll need this" anxiety, she used her scale to filter what truly mattered from the noise. So ask yourself, what's draining your emotional energy at home without offering anything in return? Just naming those invisible energy thieves might be your first step toward letting them go. Vivian's sixth insight shocked even her children. She made the bold decision to declutter not based on who she used to be but on who she was becoming. The future self-test asked Vivian a question that changed everything. Does keeping this item support who I'm becoming, or does it tie me to a version of myself that's already complete? Most seniors declutter with guilt-tripping to preserve old roles or uphold long-gone identities. But Vivian shifted her perspective completely. She stopped asking how she could possibly part with things and instead began asking how those things fit into the life she was actively choosing to build. Her business suits were the first hurdle. For decades, they had symbolized success, leadership, and a fiercely driven career. But that chapter was already beautifully written. Her new story included dog-walking shifts at the animal shelter, quiet afternoons with a paintbrush in hand, and the freedom to travel anywhere, anytime. The suits no longer fit that story, literally or figuratively, so they went making space for clothes that reflected joy and ease instead of old expectations. Her bookcase presented another turning point. Shelves of business strategy and management titles had once been essential. Now, they were barriers to growth. She wasn't rereading them, and her current curiosity leaned toward creative writing, photography, and gardening. By clearing those shelves, she made room not just for new books, but for a mindset ready to explore and expand. This is why the future self-test is so powerful. It reframes letting go from loss into liberation. Vivian didn't mourn what she gave away. She celebrated what she was moving toward. The craft room offered a tangible expression of that transformation. Gone were the untouched fabric piles and that clunky old sewing machine. In their place, she positioned an easel where sunlight streamed in, assembled her new watercolor set, and created a space that finally felt alive with possibility. But the hardest challenge came when she turned this mindset toward her late husband's belongings. For a long time, keeping everything exactly as he'd left it felt like honoring him. But she came to realize that true tribute meant continuing to live, not preserving a museum. She chose a few deeply meaningful items that brought her comfort and allowed the rest to go where they might bless someone else. That decision, she felt, would have made him proud. Even the kitchen got a fresh start. The oversized appliances and industrial cookware that once served a bustling social calendar were replaced with a few well-loved tools, a tea kettle, and space for a small herb garden. It became a sanctuary, not a showplace. Through all of this, Vivian proved a simple truth. Decluttering isn't just about getting rid of things, it's about making intentional space for the life you still want to live. The future self-test didn't erase her past. It made room for the woman she was still becoming. And that's how Vivian learned to embrace change rather than cling to outdated versions of herself. She understood that letting go wasn't a betrayal of the past, but an act of honoring it while making room for what's next. It was about evolving, about being brave enough to grow. So, who is your future self? What kind of home, habits, or daily rhythms does that version of you need to thrive? Declaring it out loud, even in a simple comment, can solidify the vision and give you the confidence to let go of anything that no longer serves your evolution. Vivian's seventh and final trick, the one that completed her transformation, was introducing meaningful completion ceremonies. These were not just sentimental rituals, they were emotional safeguards, tools that gave her closure instead of regret. For many seniors, tossing beloved items into black trash bags feels like erasing history. But Vivian didn't sneak things out like she was ashamed. She paused to honor the role each item had played in her life before sending it on with love. She started with her business wardrobe. One by one, she held the suits and relived the proudest moments they'd accompanied her through closing big deals, mentoring young colleagues, navigating boardrooms. Then she blessed those clothes to serve another woman's dreams and donated them to a nonprofit that supports women entering the workforce. The books she gave away were accompanied by handwritten thank you notes to the authors. "This book got me through a hard season," one said. "May it do the same for someone else." Some recipients were so moved, they reached out to tell her how those messages transformed the donation into something personal and powerful. But perhaps the most touching ceremony involved her photo albums. Instead of casually tossing duplicates or blurry prints, she held what she called a memory celebration. She thanked each set of photos for capturing moments that had shaped her and released them with grace. It was her way of saying, "These memories live in me, not in this pile of prints. No guilt, no regret, just deep gratitude." The most elaborate ritual was saved for her children's artwork. She took photos of every piece she wasn't keeping and compiled them into a digital gallery titled My Children's Masterpieces. Then she sat quietly, remembering the fridge door displays, the school open houses, the joy in her kids' eyes. Each piece was thanked, each memory honored, before being released. When she shared the digital album with her adult children, they were moved to tears. The drawings were no longer buried in storage bins, they were beautifully preserved and more accessible than ever. This is the real magic of decluttering with intention. It's not about dumping the past. It's about closing each chapter with respect, clarity, and celebration. And when you do that, you free yourself not just from clutter but from the invisible weight it carried all along. The most unexpected moment in Vivian's journey came with what she called her retirement ceremonies rituals she created for letting go of broken, worn out, or no longer functional items. Instead of feeling ashamed or guilty for owning things that had long outlived their purpose, she honored them. That favorite sweater she'd worn through countless winters? She whispered a thank you and sent it to textile recycling. Her mother's mixing bowls, chipped and faded but rich with family meal memories, were passed on to a young neighbor just learning to cook. Even her wedding china, once the centerpiece of holiday gatherings, was held one last time, remembered, and then donated so another family could make their own cherished memories. But the most emotional ceremony was reserved for items tied to her late husband. Vivian called it a love celebration. One by one, she held each object, shared aloud the memory it held, some joyful, some deeply tender, and then made the choice. Did this item bring comfort, or did it prolong her grief? Comforting pieces stayed. The painful ones, though still meaningful, were blessed and released to serve others. It was grief transformed into grace. In just 48 hours, Vivian didn't just clear a home, she conducted dozens of intimate rituals that turned letting go into an act of deep self-respect. By the time the moving truck pulled up, she wasn't just packed and ready, she was free. Not because the rooms were empty, but because she was finally living with intention. 3 months later, she called with an update I'll never forget. "I thought I was clearing out my house," she said. "But really, I was clearing out my life for the next chapter." That next chapter? It includes teaching art at the senior center, volunteering at 3 organizations, and yes, dating again, for the first time in 20 years. Vivian's 7 ruthless but compassionate tricks didn't just help her declutter, they helped her rediscover who she was becoming. Because that's the real heart of it. Decluttering isn't about getting rid of things. It's about creating space for the life you still want to live. If this story resonates with you, share it with someone who needs it. These 7 strategies only work if you put them into practice. So, which one will you try first? Let me know, I read every comment. And if you're ready for your own senior reset, make sure to subscribe and join us each week. This is your time to create your best chapter yet.